Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, what if I told you that the difference between a top-tier Harvard student and, well, everyone else has absolutely nothing to do with having some genius-level IQ? Seriously, it's not a genetic gift, and it's definitely not about having a fancy family library passed down through the generations. It is entirely about their method. Look, Harvard students aren't necessarily studying harder. In fact, a lot of them are actually studying less. But their approach, it's so deliberately designed that every single hour they put in literally does the work of three. Today, we're going to explore the exact scientifically backed frameworks that make mastering your material with time to spare completely possible.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're hitting the fluency illusion, the SQ3R method, interleaving practice, defeating the forgetting curve, supercharging notes, and finally, environment and identity shifts. Let's get right into it.
All right, section 1, the fluency illusion. It's all about quality over quantity. Now, before we can build any new, effective habits, we first have to completely destroy this massive myth that just putting in more effort equals better results. Harvard's own Learning Lab shows that if you're doing a brutal 14-hour study grind, it leads straight into what they call the fluency illusion. Basically, this is a cognitive bias where the material just feels familiar because you've passively reviewed it, and it completely tricks your brain into thinking, hey, I've learned this, I've mastered it. When you're just passively rereading a textbook over and over, or mindlessly dragging a highlighter across paragraphs, you are falling face first into this trap. Your brain sees the words and goes, oh yeah, I know this. But you haven't actually learned it, you've just seen it before. You're confusing basic familiarity with actual testable mastery. So the crucial point is this. It really comes down to studying for comfort versus studying for mastery. The ultimate shift that top students make is that they study to be tested, not to feel comfortable. You know that uncomfortable friction you feel like your brain is literally lifting heavy weights trying to pull a fact from memory? That isn't confusion. That's the literal building of stronger neural pathways in real time. You have to lean into that discomfort because that is where the actual learning lives. Moving right along, section 2, the SQ3R method. Let's talk about active reading. So now that we have the right mindset about leaning into that discomfort, how do we actually consume a text? Because the traditional way, staring at page 1, dragging your eyes to page 2, falling asleep, waking up, and repeating, is completely broken. It's totally passive. Instead, top learners use this 5-step framework: survey, question, read, recite, and review. Let's break that down. First, survey. Before you read a single word, just scan the headings, bold terms, and summary boxes to build a mental map of the chapter. Taking literally 2 minutes to do this saves you 20 minutes later. Second, question. Turn every heading into a question. So, causes of World War I becomes what caused World War I. Now your brain is actually on a hunt for an answer. Third, read. But you're reading strictly to answer those questions, not just to mindlessly reach the end of the chapter. Fourth is recite, which forces spoken understanding. And finally, review. Skim everything again to lock in that mental structure you just built. I really want to emphasize that recite step because it boils down to this harsh reality check. If you can't say it out loud in your own words, you didn't learn it, you just saw it. That is the ultimate reality test for your brain. By closing the book and speaking your answer out loud to an empty room, you are proving whether you've actively processed the text or if you were just, passively absorbing ink on a page. Okay, section 3, interleaving practice. Time to mix up those problems. Think about how you usually prep for a math or science exam. Hammering out 20 identical problems in a row feels incredibly easy, right? But that blocked learning gives you a totally false sense of security. You do a quadratic equation, then another one, then another. Actually, wait, it feels great in the moment. But that automatic pilot mode is entirely context dependent. On exam day, the questions are all mixed up, and boom, your brain freezes. Interleaving, on the other hand, purposely mixes the whole shebang up. A quadratic, then a linear equation, then a geometry word problem, then back to quadratic. It mimics the messy, chaotic reality of actual exam conditions. Difficulty is the point here, guys. No autopilot allowed. When you use interleaving, your practice sessions are going to feel harder and way messier. But because your brain cannot predict what's coming next, it is forced to actively think every single time. It has to independently identify the specific problem type and then actively choose the right method to apply. That is exactly the mental muscle an exam demands from you. Section 4, the forgetting curve. Let's talk about beating memory loss. Understanding the material is one thing, but actually keeping it in your head, that's the real challenge. We have to face the stark scientific reality of how incredibly fast human memory deteriorates. 70%. That is the massive biological obstacle we are up against. Without deliberate intervention, the average person forgets up to 70% of new information within just 24 hours. No joke, that's just how our biology works. And this highlights exactly why cramming the night before a test is just absolute folly. You are literally fighting a losing battle against your own brain.
And this brilliantly illustrates the solution: spaced repetition. Instead of cramming in one horrific, anxiety-inducing panic session, you review the material at strategically increasing intervals, like day 1, day 3, day 7, day 14. Every time you force yourself to successfully recall something, right as you're on the verge of forgetting it, your brain gets a massive signal that this information is vital, and it stores it much deeper. You can even automate this whole timeline using really cool flashcard tools like Anki.
But remember, you can't just passively reread on those timeline days. You absolutely must pair spaced repetition with active recall tactics. Close your notes. Write down everything you know from memory on a blank sheet of paper. Use rigorous practice questions. Solve complex problems completely from scratch. Look, rereading only builds familiarity. Rigorous self-testing builds exam-ready mastery. Combine active recall with spaced repetition, and you literally make forgetting structurally difficult. Moving to Section 5, Supercharging Notes. Enter the Cornell system. So most of us make the mistake of acting like a court stenographer during class, right? Just mindlessly copying down every single word the professor says, filling up pages of notes we are never going to look at again. It's a completely broken system. The Cornell layout fixes this by dividing your page into 3 sections. During class, you take your standard focus notes in the wide right column. At the very bottom, you write a concise 3-sentence summary of the page in your own words. But the true magic, that happens in the narrow left column. Within 24 hours of the class, you review your notes and write active recall questions on the left side that your notes on the right side answer. Let's move to and see how this builds, because taking the notes is really just step 1. The real magic happens with this specific Harvard twist. The real power here is covering the right side of the page, looking strictly at your questions on the left, and answering them aloud. You check your answer, and you repeat the process. This literally transforms your notebook from a useless static transcript into a customized, high-powered self-testing machine. It's a total game changer. Finally, Section 6, Environment and Identity Shifts, making studying your default. Honestly, this might be the most foundational layer of everything we've talked about today. Top students do not rely on willpower to get their studying done, because willpower always runs out. Instead, they engineer their physical environments and their own self-image so that studying becomes their absolute default behavior. Let's look at environment design first. Your brain deeply associates physical spaces with specific behaviors. If you study in bed, your brain connects that space with sleep and scrolling social media. But if you dedicate one specific spot, even just a simple desk or a specific chair in the corner of a room, your brain triggers instant focus the moment you sit there. It's conditioning, pure and simple. You further remove friction by laying your books out the night before and, crucially, putting your phone in an entirely different room. 96 times. That is how many times the average person picks up their smartphone every single day. Think about that for a second. If your phone is sitting next to you on the desk, face up or face down, it simply doesn't matter. You cannot possibly build deep, rigorous focus in tiny 10-minute windows between dopamine hits. The distraction is just too powerful. Put it in another room. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this leads to a deeper psychological layer, the identity shift. High performers don't say, I need to force myself to study today. They say, I'm someone who takes this seriously. When you deeply internalize this identity, everything changes. You stop negotiating with yourself every single afternoon about whether or not you feel like studying. It's simply who you are, so you just sit down and do the work. But look, you don't just magically wake up with a new identity. You have to earn it. The key is to start small and build evidence. Don't overwhelm yourself by trying to study for 6 straight hours today. Start with just 30 unbroken, deeply focused minutes. Do it today, do it tomorrow. Every single time you focus for just 30 minutes, you are literally casting a vote for that new identity as a focused, serious learner. Which brings us to our final question for this explainer. Which technique are you starting with today? We've covered SQ3R for active reading, the Cornell Notes twist for understanding, spaced repetition and active recall for long-term retention, interleaving for problem solving, and environment design for absolute consistency. Now, please don't try to implement all 5 at once. Pick just one framework to master first, build the habit, and then add the next. I want you to take immediate action, so drop into the comments and tell me which one you are choosing. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.